Hello, Tom. How are you?
It's good to see you.
It's really good to see you. I just before we recorded, we chatted for 5 minutes, and I say, okay, let's stop, let's start recording because already saying things that I think would be interesting to share with people who will listen. And one of the things I said is that as I was thinking of our meeting, is that what's cool is that when I see Tom, I'm happy to see him, and I can see that you're happy to see me. Whether it's been a few days, that doesn't happen very much anymore, but it used to be like that. Or a few months, a few years, the conference or online, sometimes in a training or something like that. It really feels like it's cool to see you and we can start chatting. And that's exactly what happened during the 5 minutes before I started the recording. We started talking and about psychology, about climbing, because that's something that we've had in common. I'm so very happy to see you, Paul, record this fifth episode of my podcast.
Our lives, your life and my life, have kind of dovetailed and played, I would say, you and I have had many commensurate experiences. You came up in a rat lab. I came up in a rat lab. I discovered uh, behavior analysis kind of late in my life. You discovered behavior analysis early in your life, but then we both kind of discovered ACT. And you brought an RFT sensibility to ACT that perhaps was not quite as well articulated in the general ACT practitioner world until you started delineating specifically how one might make use of RFT in session in a way that doesn't require translating the hexaflex into RFT, but really or rather involves translating uh, what a client says into RFT terms directly.
Mhm.
And I very much appreciated that when we first met. And then, of course, I discovered when you and I were talking, oh, we're both rock climbers. Okay,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
that explains so much of how we view the mystery and excitement of the world. I don't think that I don't think that it requires necessarily being an adventure athlete, but I think that being an adventure athlete, be it rock climbing or mountaineering, ski mountaineering, or anything that involves like some degree of risk, lends itself to seeing the paradoxical world of ACT very clearly. I don't think that
Yeah.
you need that, but that background lends itself easily. I've known many adventure athletes who, in coming to a point in their lives where things didn't quite fit anymore and were looking for some kind of help, when they came across ACT immediately made sense to them. So you and I, having come to ACT, also having been rock climbers, I think ACT completely makes sense in the sense that, you and I, like, we look at problems as being things that are beautiful. I look
Mm.
at things that are very difficult.
Yeah, that's right. I think we both have that sensitivity for
Yeah,
aesthetic and beauty in science, in life, and
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
I can see that in the way we get passionate about the work. You know, it's a geeking out and all. But that's why I think we connected well when we met in Reno. The context is that I joined Reno to do my postdoc in 2010, and met you in the program. And when we started talking, I think we had the same, yeah, the same kind of passion about, and to be fair, it's present in a lot of people who are in this community. But yeah, something about the beauty, perhaps, of the even in the exchange. That's also why I was very happy to have you here. Well, I'm happy to have you here right now, but in the prospect because I know that the experience of exchanging with it is yeah, there is something. fun, interesting, but also harmonious about it, I think.
Mm.
Uh, and that's not unlike climbing when you're in the flow. And can you actually talk a little bit about your experience with climbing? I was not planning to talk about it specifically. In my last episode, I talked with Fabian about martial arts, and now I realize, hey, we could do this whole thing about climbing. It could be interesting too. Um, can you say a little bit about your experience? One of the things that I think I noticed is that you also you're not just a climber in gyms, but in the mountains, and that's what I mostly did, and that's what attracted me to climbing. It was climbing as part of other things, more like mountaineering, really. Um, there is there is the challenge, there is the nature, obviously. There is the danger, especially when I was younger, something attractive about exposing yourself to something dangerous and overcoming your fear. Uh, and there is also an aspect, and then I'll like to hear what you have connected with in terms of climbing. One aspect also is how can I call it? Is that word meticulosity in English? Being meticulous, not
Yes,
that's
meticulous. Uh-huh.
meticulous. Okay. So it's like, there's sort of professionalism, uh, um, being very, very conscientious about what you do. You cannot climb seriously, or at least live very long, if you're not careful with safety, with if you go in the mountains, there's a lot to take into account in terms of preparation, and that's an aspect I've always loved. It's interesting because there are areas in my life where I don't like to prepare at all. I can't even like think of planning. It's just I hate it. But when it came to climbing mountains, I love the preparation. Looking at a map and preparing your bag, thinking about the itinerary, and pay attention to details. Uh, that's something that obviously I found also in the experimental psychology, preparing your studies and experiments, being very, very precise. So, what was it like for you? What's attractive
Shouldn't
about
I
climbing?
shouldn't say this at all, but it just fits so nicely. I'm writing a novel, and it is. I mean, I shouldn't say it because so many people start and never finish. And this is when I could write very quickly if I have the time to do it, and I'm probably going to just do it a little bit slowly,
Hmm.
both because it began as a prose poem and just a slightly then it kind of morphed into a long prose poem. It's kind of in the vein of Bob Dylan's Tarantula or other Gertrude Stein's longer prose poetry work, and then it morphed into something that led to the next chapter, and it begins when my buddy Marcus and I wake up on the side of the road after having slept for a couple of hours, and we're meeting our friends at 7:30 in the morning in Snoqualmie, an area that you're very familiar with, but maybe
Yeah.
not everybody's
For those
watching.
who don't
It,
know, Snoqualmie is with North Bend is the two little
right.
town next to each other. Is where Twin Peaks, the famous David Lynch show, was
Yep.
filmed. So you
Yep.
may be more familiar with it than you realize. And yeah, it's my playground, really. Yeah.
Well, so that area of the North Cascades is really the only truly still glaciated part of the United States,
Didn't
and
realize
it's
that.
a very, very
Interesting.
special area. And
Hmm.
the mountaineering there is not necessarily high altitude, but it is serious in terms of the meticulous preparation that goes into it. We wake up in the side of the road, having slept just so that we didn't wake up our friends in the middle of the night, and we drive in and turn on the radio. So it's right outside of Seattle, basically. So
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
driving into Snoqualmie, which is just a little south of Seattle, and we turn on the radio, and there's this like weird War of the Worlds kind of broadcast. We're like, that's too weird. We turn the channel, same broadcast, and we turn another channel. We figure, okay, this has got to be some weird like
Yeah.
Pacific Northwest ritual. Like every year on this day, they do this weird thing, and then we get into Snoqualmie, and people are pulling their cars over and trying to get cell reception, and this person gets out of his car and he vomits, and we're like, what the hell is going on? And we go into a diner,
Mhm.
and there's these TVs lining the four corners of the diner, and everybody's looking up. And this is September 11th, 2001.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so 7:30 in the morning there is 10:30 in the morning in New York City.
Mhm.
And one tower is down and the other tower has been hit.
Yeah.
And uh, we spend some time there and we go to collect our friends. And one of them just broke up with their boyfriend. So now we're going to be a party of three and we're trying to reach our family members. We can't reach
Mhm.
our family members.
Mhm.
Our
Mhm.
phones don't work. And we decide we've been prepping to put up a brand new route on Prusik Peak.
Mhm.
Prusik Peak, you probably know, not everybody knows. It's a kind of like a destination climbing spot in the enchantments in the
Mhm.
North Cascades, and it has these long rock alpine routes on them that are several hundred feet in length. And we saw this thing a year before, and we wanted to create a new line on this thing. And we knew it was going to be really, really hard. We looked at it very carefully and recognized this was above our level of ability back then.
Yeah.
And so we trained for a year to be able to do this. And we came back. Um, and we hiked in and camped on the call like a day after 9/11 and proceeded to have like a wild epic, just insane epic on this mountain. And when climbers talk about epics, they're talking about things not going as planned.
Mhm.
And in the mountains, no matter how much you prepare, no matter how meticulous your preparation is, things can go differently than you intend.
Yeah.
The the weather can go bad. Other parties can be on the wall. Somebody on another party might be gravely injured and require you to abandon your pursuits to
Mhm.
go get them off of the mountain alive. Things like this make the planning and preparation that you do, put the planning and preparation that you do in the mountains in perspective of what truly matters, what is deeply important, which for most of us is coming home and being able to climb another day.
Yeah,
And
it is an interesting, you have to find a good balance between preparing, planning, having that discipline, and at the same time, being able to adapt, to improvise, because there's a lot that you can control. You have to kind of revise your expectation every moment, especially when the weather is changing rapidly. That's one of the things I really like the most. It reminds me a lot. It might be odd to make the comparison because morally speaking, it feels very different, but functionally, it makes, I think, a lot of sense. Of bank robbers, like the way it's depicted in movies like Heat, for example. It's very
Mhm.
similar. That's one of the reasons
Mhm.
why I like these movies, is that you sense that the professionalism, the discipline, there's a plan, we have to stick to it. It's 30 seconds, 30 seconds. I don't care if I could maybe have continued. No, it's now. Same thing in the mountains. We say we start to climb down at 3 p.m. because after that the ice is going to start to melt. I don't care if there's on just 2 minutes to the summit, you could do it. You want to survive it, like you said, if you want to be able to climb again tomorrow, you have to stick with it. And at the same time, there's of course some degree of improvisation, adaptation, or else you don't go very very far. I love that it's you have to constantly find that balance, and for me it's very similar to what I love about the practice of psychotherapy. When you're having this one-on-one interaction, you may have a protocol more or less specific. You may have just like a set of principles, a case conceptualization, a plan
Mm.
even for this session, but at the same time, you have to remain very, very flexible in order to actually make it work.
You are, of course, referring to that scene between Robert De Niro's character and Al Pacino's character, where they're sitting in a diner, and
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
one is a detective, and the other is a professional bank robber,
Yeah, yeah.
and they are recognizing in each other that they could be best friends. They
Yes,
could
yeah,
love
yeah.
each other deeply as human
Hmm.
beings, and
Hmm.
yet the one is committed to one thing and the other is committed to something else. And the other is saying, in the end, at this moment, I'm going to drop you.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
it comes to that, I'm going to drop you.
yeah.
And the other is saying back, that's
Same.
exactly my point. Like,
Exactly.
if it comes to that, I'm dropping you
Yeah.
first. Now, there's another thing going on too, which is the relationship, the love between the bank robber and this person who they have met.
Yeah.
And their commitment goes as far as dropping everything and leaving everything, including that person who they've just fallen in love with.
Exactly.
In
Yeah.
my novel, there's a love triangle as
Mm.
well.
Mm.
And I think that this speaks to the heart of the therapeutic process. That moment in session where I see in my client that they could be me.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And I see in my client at moments of my life, I have walked that same walk. And now I'm walking a different walk. I'm inviting them to walk a different walk alongside me. And they may, and they
Hmm.
may not. And if they don't, what will I do? And how will I continue to express a loving therapeutic alliance with them, even as they make choices that would be different from those that I'm inviting them to
Yeah.
make?
Yeah. Yeah. That I like the parallel. You have to be able to join your clients in their reality because sometimes they will do join you in your reality. It's about sharing reality somewhere, and it's very dynamic. It cannot be just mine, just theirs. It's going to be a process of connecting. But often I find that it's more me joining them because they
Mm.
bring their story and because I'm used to and trained to join other people's reality and stay in touch with mine, not losing myself completely. There are moments when I you can lose yourself because you know how to come back. It's very similar again to being in the mountains and accepting to sometimes you can be lost if you know how to find your way. At least that's what happens if you go off track, right? Especially like skiing and you're not going to where there are tracks. You have to be able to know where you are without necessarily knowing where you're going or how to find your way.
I was a climbing guide for 12 years, and sometimes I would take people up routes I haven't been on before.
Mhm.
And my my pitch to them has always been, or had always been, that uh, we might get lost. My job isn't not to get lost. My job is to get us found. My
Yeah,
job is to get us back down.
yeah, yeah,
So I began climbing when I was very, very young, and I was immediately drawn to the adventure and to the movement, the grace,
mm,
but more importantly than anything else, I think the friendships and the camaraderie. And I think
yeah,
that one of the things that being in the mountains and being in situations where you have to make some very important decisions about um, how much gear you're going to place as you're climbing, how much protective gear you're going to place, how much time you're going to spend on each 100-foot segment
mm,
of the terrain that you're covering. So how much material goods you're going to carry with
yeah,
you into the
yeah.
mountains? Are you going to carry your entire house, or are you going
Mm,
to like
mm,
make it very, very, very slim? and go super fast. The more you take, the slower you go. The more you take, the more comfortable you are. The less you take, the faster you go. But the less comfortable you are, the less you take, the more anything that unexpected happens puts a strain on your ability to survive the
Yeah.
situation. And
Yeah.
the decisions that you make ultimately become the fabric of the bond that you form with the people that you
Hmm.
go into these adventures with.
Yeah, you
And they
you
become,
you've been then it's like we've been
then you've
there
lived through
together,
something
right? We
together,
experienced
you know?
yes. There's
And that
something
I
special about
it is.
that
And
shared
every kind
yeah.
of
Go ahead.
friendship is like
Yeah.
lifelong. It's like
Yeah.
forever, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah, when you remember with a friend or I I went in mountains a lot also with my brother and when we have memories of the that night when the weather was terrible and we were lost and we found our way and it's unique really. I think it's probably yeah I'm for sure actually some of my best memories are about overcoming challenges even though we may not have been able to do what we were wanting to do. We didn't reach the summit. We may not even have gone very far, but we overcame a challenge. We were together and there is something I also like experience of in the mountains by myself. I never did like solo climbing. That's crazy to me. Maybe we'll talk about it if you have some experience that or some thoughts about it.
I do.
Have you seen that it's a documentary? I think it's called Solo about
Free solo.
free solo.
Yeah, Alec Honnold. So he lived just a
I mean it's like it feels like a nightmare put into a movie to me. Like I've had nightmares of climbing. It's really like how can you climb walls like that, like El Capitan without a rope, completely by yourself, and you have his girlfriend is watching from the bottom and you cannot do anything, you can just watch them. What are your thoughts on that from a psychological perspective, from a climber perspective, from just a person perspective?
I free soloed for several years when I
You
was
did it,
younger,
okay.
and never
Without
my
rope
rule.
at all or with a system of
No rope. Yeah, yeah, no. So there in climbing technical jargon, there's different kinds of
yeah,
soloing, and there's rope soloing, there's lead rope soloing,
yeah.
and top rope soloing,
Free
free
solo
solo,
is no rope at all.
no ropes,
No.
and I did that for several years. And my rule in free soloing was always that I would never free solo anything that I didn't think that in a pinch I couldn't down solo.
Yeah.
And I free solo things that were relatively difficult by standards back then, like 30 years ago. But I
Mm,
free soloed still, if I was climbing at what climbers refer to as like 5'11", if I was climbing 5'11s, I
mm.
didn't solo anything harder than
Yeah.
5'9",
Okay.
5'9
Yeah.
plus. And 5'9", 5'9 plus back then was actually fairly hard. Like,
Hmm.
because things that people were putting up that were 5'9", the idea was that 5 point and then whatever number comes after it is a little bit like the Dewey Decimal System. So it was intended not to go above 9. It was
Hmm.
intended to go from 0 to 9. And as climbers got very good in
Yeah, you had
1960s
to
and
create new
70s, they
categories.
got
Yeah.
up to 5'8", and there were like a lot of
Mm,
things became 5'8" that really should have been 5'10" or 11. And things that were
mm,
5'9" were really should have been 5'11 plus,
mm,
and so when I was free soloing 5'9", it actually meant something. Like some of the things that I climbed that were 5'9", they were stout, and they were closer to my edge of ability than I would ever think about being without protection on
yeah.
today. That was then, and now I'm older, and I have different interests. Unfortunately, climbing is big enough that there's so many different games to play. That's
Mm,
but one, and it was exciting and it was interesting to me, and it was probably more driven by a competition with myself than anything else. I certainly
yeah.
didn't tell anybody else when I was going free soloing.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
was very quiet and private about it.
Mm-hmm.
Every now and then, somebody who I knew would see me and they would come to me and talk to me about my
Yeah.
accomplishment. And that made me kind of uncomfortable because I didn't think of it as an accomplishment. I thought of it as something that I was doing in relationship to myself. There
Okay.
was a, there was a, there was an other that was part of me,
Mm.
and I was engaged in a conversation with that other that was me.
What was that about? It was about what? Finding your limits, perhaps, or
But no, I mean, I think maybe the limits of my willingness to be on the edge, but
yeah.
even then, because I was climbing a little bit lower than my edge, it was not that. It was something about um, um, like there was a relationship with nature and
Uh-huh.
the rock,
Yeah.
but there was more of
Yeah,
a
it's more like a
relationship.
direct relationship. It's not filtered by the rope. It's not filtered by anything. It's you and
That part of it is very
yeah,
direct,
yeah.
and I climbed and I free soloed in places where I kind of knew the terrain very well, so I knew where there were bees, I knew where there were snakes, I knew where there were birds, I knew where there were peregrine falcons, and I
So
knew how
so
it felt when the peregrine falcons swooped down next to me. So those were even if somewhat unpredictable, relatively contained because I understood them. I had in RFT terms, like if you look at it from the
mm,
Rome perspective,
mm,
like they would uh, I would not need to orient to these things terribly much, and they
I see.
wouldn't evoke a lot of aversive
Yeah.
responding for
Hmm.
me
So
when
you'd
they
stay
happen.
focused on
I
the
could stay
task,
focused
stay
on the task at
the
hand.
flow of
Exactly. And
yeah.
so really for me it was more about my relationship with myself and my conversation with myself
Mm.
and so from a didactic framing perspective, like really there was a sense of looking at myself from a
Yeah.
distance as
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
was engaged in a task
Hmm.
of moving.
A form of meditation in the end, right?
And if you
Uh,
think about
mhm.
like to go hexaflex for a
Yeah,
second,
go
like
ahead. Yeah.
there's a balance between present moment awareness and self as context.
Hmm.
And when you're completely in a present moment, you're not thinking about yourself. You're
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
doing. You're
Hmm.
in the flow of it. When you're completely in seeing yourself in context and in relation to the flow of the arc of your life and in relation to the roles that you play in your life, you are very much absorbed in a your personhood and not so much in the moment of your experience.
Mm, I see what you mean.
But
There's an expansion of your perception. So
yeah,
you're
but
seeing everything when and in the present moment you're
you're
seeing just
narrowed.
this,
Yeah,
something like that.
exactly. You're
Yeah. Yeah.
situationally aware, and perhaps, but like that doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
include
Yeah.
and so there's somewhere in the middle. Like, and it's nice that we kind of talk about, the open and aware
Hmm.
and engaged pillars of the hexaflex, because in each of these pillars, there's a balance point.
Yeah.
Like the balance point on the left arc of the pillar of the hexaflex is between letting things go and
Hmm.
letting
Hmm.
things in, letting emotions
Yeah.
and thoughts
Yeah.
in and so letting them go. There's a balance point in there. And likewise in the central pillar, there's this balance point between being fully immersed in the moment and also seeing
Yeah.
yourself in that moment. And that was that fulcrum upon which my free soloing
I see.
occurred.
Yeah.
I think having known Alex Honnold for a number of years, having spent having had conversations with him over bouldering problems and
Okay.
things over time, when I think about his experience, I think his experience is somewhat similar. I think when he was younger, he free soloed a lot because it was just easy to do, easier than
Yeah, you're more
asking
free
people to
by
spend time with
definition.
him.
You can do what you want. Yeah. Yeah.
He was like ridiculously shy, and just didn't come from a family that like
Mm.
was very social, and
Mm.
so And
Like to
then
do things by himself.
yeah, well, it was just easier. I think it was like terrifying. It was more terrifying to him to ask people to climb with him than it was to just go climb by
That's
himself.
funny, yeah.
So he did what was easier.
Yeah, yeah.
And then like, and he was as he got better, he did things that he had less familiarity with. And then he
Mm,
had that very difficult experience on Half Dome where the route went one way, but it was really hard, and he was like he didn't feel up to it. And there had
mm,
been rockfall recently, and so he knew that there was a new variation of it around the corner, but he hadn't been on it.
mm.
But he just didn't feel up to the route that the standard route. So he went around the corner to do the variation that he'd heard about, but he hadn't
Yeah.
been on it before, and he just like scared the crap out of himself. And he made a decision after that, I'm never gonna have that experience again. That wasn't the experience that he wanted.
Mm.
And he made it, he became a behavior analyst at that point.
Okay.
And I say that like without any hesitation whatsoever. He began free soloing in a very different way from that point forward. His free soloing from
Mm.
that point forward was not, I don't know what's going to happen. Let's just kind of like have like I mean, like you might, what he ended up doing was he ended up like breaking the 3,000 foot expanse of El Cap, El
Yeah.
Capitan in Yosemite Valley into micro sections
Yeah. Hmm.
that he trained on and spent a year or 2 years like training. And there were these little tiny sections that were maddeningly difficult
Hmm. Hmm.
that he spent months and months and months training. And then there were these sections that weren't all that difficult, but that were just brutally sustained. And
Yeah.
he just
Yeah.
months and months and months on those so that it just felt like it was second nature. And when he finally linked it all together in one push without a rope, uh, he had the experience that he had
Yeah, it
wanted to
was
have.
familiar enough. He'd been there and
But I think you're
mm,
right. There was something about that it is incomprehensible. It's
mm,
incomprehensible to anyone who really understands, first of all, what how big and how hard that thing is.
mm, mm.
Incomprehensible. But beyond that, like there's the fact that he just started this relationship with Sunny,
Yeah.
and she's like hanging there in the valley with him,
And
and
watching
and
him with
and and finally he kicks her
telescope.
out. He doesn't know how to say it,
Yeah.
but he's like,
Yeah.
"You got to get out of here so I can
Too much
like
to
just
think
get this
about. Yeah.
thing done." So she's like out of the valley and not there at the
Yeah.
end when he does it. And he phones her, and
Yeah.
like how could you not cry your eyes out at that? Like there's like something so
Yeah.
deeply profound about the fact that she was willing, as anyone who lives with a high altitude mountain area, or anybody who
Yeah.
lives with
That
high
must be really, really
anyone doing
difficult.
any adventurous sport
Yeah.
understands that this may be the day that your partner doesn't come home.
Yeah.
And she was very new inside of that. She hadn't married him. She was very
Yeah.
new inside that relationship, and she was willing to leave and let him have the experience that could have been the last experience of his
Yeah.
life and
Yeah.
life together. And there's something so deeply profound in that I
It is
think,
true. It is really true acceptance, really,
yeah,
of your
it is.
partner when you can accept that they're doing something that's very dangerous and I mean same thing with like a parent, like I didn't climb very dangerous things, but everything is dangerous in mountains. So you don't need to. I mean, so many even great climbers ended up dying in relatively easy um, places for them. Some famous climbers like that. How did he die there? It was because it's the mountain. But looking back, thinking back, I imagine the anxiety. My mom, for example, she never said she was afraid. She never tried to convince her not to go in the mountains. But then now I'm realizing that now that I have kids, thinking spending the whole day knowing that we're there in the mountains. That must be terrible. Like I'd love for my kids to they like climbing in the gym, and part of me feels like love for them to enjoy climbing and go in the mountains like I did, and part of me is like I don't want them to ever put a foot in the mountains because the anxiety. And the worst part is that they love climbing and they're risk takers. It's in temperament. I'm not surprised. It's not an expert in genetics, but I'm not surprised that that's something that would show up in that temperament. And part of me is like, I know it's going to happen. If it's not climbing, it will be something else anyways, and it's going to be really, really hard.
But you enter into the therapeutic relationship with clients, and you have no idea at any given moment exactly what you're going to do and what they're going
Yeah.
to do. You may have a general idea based on your case conceptualization of what you're going to do. You may have even kind of
Hmm.
thought like, I have this like metaphor that I use with somebody else. Maybe I could use something like that here, but you haven't like completely decided exactly what the parameters of that's going to be. You're engaged in an experiment in the moment with the
Hmm.
human
Hmm.
being across from you,
Yeah.
and it is as likely to go in an unplanned direction as it is in a
Yeah.
planned direction.
Yeah.
And your children see that in you. They see the willingness that you have to go there
Mm,
with
mhm, mhm.
whoever it is that sits across from you. And maybe that person sitting across from you is thinking about committing some horrible act.
Mm,
Maybe that person across from you at the table has done something reprehensible. Maybe that
mhm,
person sitting
mhm,
across from you is thinking about taking their own life. Maybe that person sitting across from you is grieving somebody else that they've lost. And you have in your past lost someone, and they're coming to you with what they are coming with brings
mhm,
up in
mhm.
you that which you thought you had handled long ago. You thought you
Yeah.
had this
Mm,
handled. Boom, it's right up in your face again. Your children, they
mm.
see walking this walk. That is the walk of a climber. That
Yeah.
is the walk of someone who is willing to go into adventure situations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with all of the preparation that you have as a master clinician, with all of the preparation that you have as someone who has done basic science and applied science and who has looked from a philosophical lens, it's still you are looking into the unknown. At that
Mhm.
moment,
Yeah.
you sit across from that person, you are staring into the unknown.
Yeah.
Your kids, they see that. Of course, they love that.
In that scene in Heat, in the diner, at some point, don't remember who says, I don't know how to do anything else than so one is doing scores, the other one is catching thieves. I don't know how to do anything else. Say, me neither. And then the other one says, and I don't really want to do anything else. And the other one says, me neither. It's very much like that. It's if it's not about climbing, it will be about something else. And yeah, I think it's true. I think I like to approach my work and even these podcasts in the spirit of integrity, yeah, professionalism, in the sense of I wanna feel like that whole idea of preparation, like you were saying, like you know where you're going, you've planned that before, but at the same time, you want to be to me it's a some also yeah, it's a form of humility really. It's that now we're getting into the process and I'm not in control of everything, and I don't want to be in control of everything. I don't like that. I don't like to me, there's nothing worse than thinking about, so if you think about therapy or podcast as a comparison to a chess game. I like playing chess, although recently I think I realized I actually don't like it that much. And why? Because it's not, maybe I'm not good enough to think of it this way, but to me, it requires calculation too much. You do a right move or wrong move. There is a point at which it's too late. It's over. You did the wrong move, and now it's a matter of just unfolding until you lose. And I think I like. games or processes where you can always go back to the right move when it's never over, you know.
You're familiar with Miles Davis, right?
Absolutely. My son, second name is Miles, and is in reference to
Ah.
Miles Davis. So yes, I know Miles
So
Davis. I love Miles
Miles
Davis.
Miles lived down the block from me. I had an
Really?
apartment on 7th Street between First and A in New York City during the early 1980s, and
Okay.
Miles lived one block away between A and B in the Anaconda. It was
Hmm.
a co-op. I used to see him at like 2 o'clock in the morning. I'd sit out on the stoop
Wow.
with my dog, and Miles would be coming down, and hey, Blue Eyes, how you doing? Let me
Ah,
pet your dog, and he pet my dog, and I saw him, and I like one time I went to see James Moody play. I played jazz flute, and James
hmm.
Moody played
Okay.
sax and flute, and he played with Miles's quintet. So one day, like we go down to 7th Avenue South, and James Moody's playing with his band, and I'm sitting up front, and these two people come in through like the door in the back, and they're making all this noise, and so I'm like leaning in to try and hear the band, because these two people come in, they're just like making this racket, and Moody looks up and he says, "My friends have arrived," and he says, "Y'all want to come up and play?" And they look at each other, and then like we turn around and look, and it's Miles and Dizzy Gillespie. Miles
Hmm.
and Dizzy Gillespie, and they are like so wasted. They're just drunk out of their minds, and they come up on stage, and Dizzy takes out his horn, and he cannot play a note. He just cracks up, and Miles ushers him off the stage. He's like, "Go sit down." So he goes and sits down, and Miles Davis,
Hmm.
as drunk as he is, he just takes over the band and just commands. It
Hmm.
is, I've never seen anything like that before in my life.
Ah,
Herbie Hancock, he talks about his experience like before he actually joined the quintet.
okay.
He was young. He was like in his 20s, and he got invited to come up and jam with the band. And he got up on stage like when the band was in mid-set to just play a song with them. His first time playing with Miles.
Hmm.
And he gets up and he's playing alongside them, and Miles gives them the nod to take a solo. So he takes a solo, and he's supposed to come back, he's supposed to bring the solo back around to a G major seventh chord.
Hmm.
And he does his best to do that, but he lands on the wrong chord. And Miles shoots him a look, and Miles like plays around it and turns it into something beautiful.
Yep.
And Herbie Hancock is like, I botched, I totally botched.
Hmm. Hmm.
This was my shot to play with Miles. I'm never going to play with this man again. Like that was my career. I just like frittered away in one single second. And Miles Davis could see on Herbie's face that he was distraught, and he
Yeah.
goes over and whispers into Herbie's ear, "In jazz, there are no
Yeah.
mistakes. It's what you do after a note that didn't go the way you planned.
Yeah.
That's what matters."
Yeah. I love this quote. Yeah. There's another one that's similar. It says, "Fear no mistakes, there aren't." It's definitely the spirit with which I like to do my work, and that's probably why I moved away from research progressively. That's
Mhm.
also why I'm so comfortable in the conceptual analysis.
Mhm.
I'm much more comfortable talking about philosophy or drawing conceptual hypotheses from the data because it's an area where you can build connections, you can change your mind, you can revise. And absolutely there is a risk in there. You can make up any story and progressively get disconnected from the data. That's the risk. But um, but there's a value in doing that, and some people are good at that. And other people, I think, are better at being very, very precise, close to the data, maybe a little less good at expanding the vision from the data and see what we can do with it. Some people are incredible at doing all that. And they often run a whole program and they publish 50 books and 600 papers and things like that, right?
Their name is
Uh,
Steve. Yeah.
you need a bit of both. But for me, I think progressively I felt to constrain. Even though I liked this, what I was saying earlier about being meticulous and precise and planning, but it's not even a matter of being patient or not. It's like with what I was saying about playing chess. Is that in the end, it's gonna work or not work. You know, it's like writing grants. I was never able to write a grant. I hate it. The little bit I did when I was in Reno participating in writing grant, I was terrible. I could not do anything very a contribution that really made much of a um, that had much value because I think for me that the idea that you're doing all that and in the end is going to be sanctioned by either you get it or you don't get it, it's very demoralizing. It's not that I need to have the certainty that it's going to work. You know, just like in mountains, I don't have to have the certainty I'll get to the summit, but I need to have a way of looking at what I'm doing that makes that there aren't any mistakes in the end. It will be part of the process. Now, I'm sure it's possible to write a grant and to do research in that spirit and not think, well, it's not the end of it. Even if you don't get the grant, you will get to another grant, or you will, yeah, of course, you can do that. But for me, it was difficult to approach the process of writing a grant or a paper that's going to be potentially rejected in that way. I like to, it's like in cooking, you know, I like to cook things that you can always readjust and change and it will be good anyways. How could that fail? With the ingredients that you're putting, it cannot be bad. I like that. I look at a therapy session in that way too. I'm like, it cannot go wrong because the intention is to explore together, to connect, to even if we have a bad session, it might turn out to be the best session because we're going to talk about how bad it was. And so we'll learn something. And so it will be the best experience, like in the mountain, you know, it will be the best experience we've ever had because that's the turning point when we had that terrible session that turned out to be a big insight.
You know, and in that spirit, you
Yeah,
produced this book, which I think
yeah.
for me was like it was just a wonderful, wonderful reflection on so many different things. Like, for example, you bring up you make up these constructs of social coherence versus essential coherence versus functional coherence. I mean, you introduce these ways of conceptualizing things for which it would be awesome if we had some data, but it's not necessarily everyone's job to produce the data. Like it
Mhm.
is also somebody's job to produce the constructs that ultimately get investigated. This is a book
Yeah, yeah. I was pleased actually to see that you mentioned this formula of coherence in your book.
yeah,
I not realized
yeah,
until you mentioned it in your email the
I
other
did
day, and I
mention it
saw
in
it in the
here.
book
Yeah.
that was a concept that you're using. Yeah.
Well, there's some stuff that I introduce here that I haven't published in studies yet. We have some studies in progress, and we have some studies that already are done and we should finish writing them up and get them
Uh-huh.
out there. Uh,
Okay.
the app functional analysis that I do is very different from the one that Nicholas writes about. It's very different from the one that Steve and Stefan have developed.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think all of our different approaches to functional analysis are useful. I think
Hmm.
that the the scientist in me suggests that any one of these might have its place, and it is useful as a practitioner to be able to think, what are the conditions under which I would use this functional analysis procedure,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
what are the conditions under which I would use that one and the other. So even in applied behavior analysis, functional analysis, my students just asked me, would you help us come up with a decision tree? And I was like, what a great idea. And so yesterday morning, I created a decision tree for when you would use a traditional functional analysis, when you would use an interview-informed synthesized
Interesting.
contingency
Hmm.
analysis, a trial-based functional analysis, or when you would just kind of like shoot from the hip and so on and so forth. And um, I should point out that the person who wrote the foreword here is Jonathan
Yeah.
Tarbox. And
Yeah.
Jonathan,
Very nice forward. Yeah.
we met in 2006 when I arrived in Reno, and he had graduated a couple of years before. And he came
Okay.
back, and
Yeah, I didn't. I don't think it was there when I arrived in 2010. He had
no,
moved already to
he'd
another.
already graduated a couple of years
Yeah.
before when you got there, and even when I got there, he graduated I think in 2004 or something. He came back to give a talk on don't be afraid of private events.
Hmm.
And I was very interested in private events, having come from doing outdoor adventure therapy and having come from being a climbing guide and having read Steve Hayes' work and knowing that I wanted to bring ACT into applied behavior analysis, I was drawn to his talk, and he and I met in front of Tim Fuller's poster. Tim had done a poster presentation on measuring private events in Linda Hayes's lab, and Jonathan and I met in front of Tim's poster, and we'd never met before, and Tim was apologizing for using self-report, and Jonathan and I were like both like, man, you don't apologize for using self-report. You're wanting to investigate something for which we don't have anything more
Yeah.
precise. It's as good as it gets at this moment. And then Jonathan and I started talking. We realized we're both rock climbers, and we instantly became like very, very close friends.
Yeah.
And we have spent the last 20 years rock climbing and
Training together also, right? You led some
yes,
trainings together, right?
and
Yeah.
yes, exactly. And researching,
Yeah.
so like when we've written philosophical papers
Yeah.
together, written empirical papers
Yeah, is
together,
that
and
did you write a paper on that special issue on aontology with him?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. I read this paper a couple of years ago, and I was going through the whole literature that I could find on functional contextualism, especially the first papers from the 80s, 90s,
Mhm.
and then there's not a ton of literature on the functional contextualism really in the end, I think, but there was this whole special issue on aontology. Was that also a reply to the paper by James Herbert and I think it's Padovani, her name, or was no, that was just a different paper, but it was part
No,
of the
I
same
had
issue.
just,
Yeah.
I had been, as a grad student, I had been, both my master's and my dissertation I did with neuroscience people.
Okay.
And so, and when I began in the early part of my graduate training, the way neuroscientists talked about the brain and its relationship to behavior was they were saying that the brain controls behavior.
Yeah.
And I always kind of took them to task about that and said, I don't think that's accurate. And but we maintained our friendships and we published
Mhm.
together and then by the time I finished my dissertation, they weren't talking like that anymore.
Yeah.
Their whole field had kind of shifted, and they were
Yeah.
saying that the brain coordinates and facilitates and is part of everything that
Hmm. Hmm.
happens in behavior. It made sense to me that why why throw darts at each other? Why not publish with each other and say from one vantage point you might say it this way, from another vantage point you might say it that way.
Mm.
And ultimately, we might come to something that looks closer to being one statement, but there's no reason why we can't have two
Yeah.
statements where we
Yeah.
might say that you know ITS look at it this way, but uh, my co-author PW looks at it that way,
Hmm.
and I don't think that there's any harm in being aontological in our scientific pursuits. If we truly are aontological, then we ought to be able to say that we don't have a corner on the true way to
Hmm.
interpret results. We can interpret it from this lens or from that lens, not forgetting that, gosh, light looked at from one perspective is a particle or
Yeah.
a set
Yeah.
of particles, and from another, it's a wave.
Did you find that since we're on the topic of ontology a bit, kind of forgot that you had written these papers because I would probably have put it on the list of things I wanted to talk about with you. Um, but you see, that's the art of improvisation here. It's showing up. I had not planned to talk about climbing, and it turned out to be a really fascinating topic to talk about with you. So going back to ontology, I think, and I'm wondering what you think about it, that people confuse ontology with anti-ontology a lot in our community. I'm talking about the ACBS community. I think people think it's about there is no truth. There is it could be this, it could be that. It's all context dependent, and it tends to go all too much in that direction. What do you think about that? I could elaborate more, but
Certainly,
I'd like to
Brian
hear your
Roach
thoughts.
taught that. I don't think he still does, but he and Maria Ruiz wrote two papers suggesting that, and I'm talking about Brian Roach, who was the
Yeah.
third author
Hmm.
on the 2001 RFT book. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
like one of the first and most important RFT researchers who developed
Hmm.
I think it's called VAST, and he's developed
Forgot
the
the name.
SMART
Yeah.
program. I
Yeah.
mean, these are like programs that are just
Yeah.
extraordinary
And he's
using
never
RFT.
been shy of criticizing the ACBS community as
Yeah.
some interesting papers about Machiavellism and
Yeah.
the risk of
Well, exactly. And that's
they've
why I bring
been
them
they've
up
been
because
important moments in our community. I think those papers, the way
and I,
they were
you know, and
discussed.
I think, I mean, but those the papers that he wrote with Maria Ruiz were not that. They were saying that functional connectualism leads itself into a vacuum of um uh um moral relativism.
Yeah, yeah.
And uh, I disagree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the the value, like the comic book version of self as context, is that self as content is bad and self
Mm-hmm.
as context is good.
Mm-hmm.
That's the comic book version, and it's inaccurate. I hope you look at yourself as a podcaster because that is your role right now, and
Mm-hmm.
you are
Mm-hmm.
probably going to do some good things as a podcaster, and that is you as content. And there's nothing wrong with that. It becomes a problem if when you get down on the ground and play with your two children, you are seeing
Mm-hmm.
yourself as a podcaster
Or
and
even
you are
if I am
editing out.
too attached to this identity in
Yes,
this
that
moment, and
becomes
I'm
a
thinking, for
problem.
example, I need to know what I'm talking about, or I should. That's too much
Right. Yes,
rigidity around the
exactly.
identity.
Exactly. And likewise, self as context is excellent if you can see the whole context of your life and you can see that who you are changes depending on the context, and that who you are is not bound to your role as a
Hmm.
podcaster or as a
Hmm.
scientist or as a clinician, but that you have a whole arcing set of circumstances under which you bring together certain aspects of your life here and different aspects of your life there. And
Yeah.
that that is all very good and very important. And also it needs to be grounded in terms of like, here I am now.
Hmm.
And here
Hmm.
I am now at this moment in time is not that, and it's not anything, but it's one thing in particular at this moment and here. So the how that plays out in context is if you're a soldier on the battlefield and your CO says to you, fire on anything that moves, and
Yeah.
you're like, dude, we're walking through a village, like there's children, there's babies here, and
Mm-hmm.
your CEO says, I don't care. Like any of them could be enemy combatants, fire on anything.
Hmm.
Well, if your entire context is I'm in a war, and in a war, this is what we do, then you will follow that order
Yeah.
and kill anything, including babies. And if you are willing to stand in defiance and say that that goes against a value that I have created that is
Yeah.
important to me, that if nothing else, children's lives need to be preserved.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then you stand up to your CO and say, I won't do that. You
Yeah.
can put me in the brig if you need to. You can court-martial me if you need to. I will accept those consequences, but please understand, I will not do what you've asked me to do.
So that's what balances that flexibility that you can have with
Yeah,
the context. That's
exactly.
right. Okay.
Exactly. And I think that is as true an indication of an aontological perspective. It is not as any, and therefore I don't think that aontology lends itself to moral relativism. I think that aontology recognizes that truth is not fixed, but
Mhm.
that it's
Or
not
or
fixed
it could
doesn't
be.
mean that
It's whatever
it's
you. To me, this is how I look at it. Is that I ask myself, what continues to be true? Like, do I continue to value the life of children? Is it still back and say, yeah, it was true yesterday? When I look at my whole life and everything I know about it, it seems that it's important, it's valuable, and I cannot deny it because that's the experience I have. Now, I
yeah.
don't have to essentialize it and say, well, hence intrinsically true, it's an absolute truth that's independent of context or anything. I can just notice that as I'm scanning the whole context, as far as I can tell, it continues to be true. And hence, in this moment, it seems important. I cannot deny that it's important. Now, it could change. And there's a resistance to acknowledging that because you're like, wow, what do you mean? It could change tomorrow. You might wake up and think that's like your children don't matter. Um, Look, if they matter, they will matter. So there's no risk in asking the question. If they don't matter, then that's the experience I have, and we'll see what happens. Yes, it is a bit scary. It is a bit scary to even ask the question. That's true. But the flexibility and the consistency I think that ontology gives you is very valuable because it seems like it could damage that coherence and consistency. It's like, in the spiritual, philosophical, religious groups where it's not even allowed to ask the question. Because if you ask questions, it's already dangerous. You're already fragilizing the philosophy or the constitution, the group. But it's not a good perception actually. It's the opposite, I think. If you question it, if you reflect on it, you'll make it stronger, just like a muscle, just like anything really. So I think the value is what brings coherence and stability to the whole process. But even that needs to be questioned. So that's what we mean when we said even values need to be held lightly. That doesn't mean they're going to change any moment. Maybe they will change, maybe they won't. In most cases, they don't really change that much, it seems. They are pretty stable.
So before we started recording, you mentioned to me that you still see yourself as a climber, and
Yeah.
I
Even though
and
I
I
have not been climbing in many
so,
years.
so when you and I met, when you came to do your postdoc, and we discovered that we were both climbers, we talked about going climbing. We just never ended up doing
Yeah.
it. But I'm pretty sure that like now I
Yeah.
might like just have to twist your arm and nail and then like go to a climbing gym there because the climbing gyms there are like twice the size of climbing gyms here. It'd be really fun.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there's this like this thing that happens as you go on in life. You decide that certain things are important, and you live into those things that you find important, and then new things emerge, and all of a sudden you've got a lot of things that are important, and you end up having to pick one thing over another for maybe for a very long period of time, maybe forever, and it may seem like your values are in conflict with one another. And I remember a workshop that you gave when I think it was ACBS Reno in maybe
Mhm.
2008 or 2009. I don't know. I remember it. Or maybe you weren't giving the workshop. Maybe Louise Hayes was giving the workshop and you were just at a table that I was at and you
Yeah.
said like hold up your hand. Somebody that you were working with and I was observing was saying that they had this values conflict and you said hold up your hand. And you said, which are the fingers that you use the most? And they said these. And you said, yeah, you use those the most. And that means you don't use this one very frequently. And they said, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you were like, well, what if I were to just take this away from you? And they were like, no, you can't take it away from me.
Mhm.
And then you were like, yes, because like it's connected to something bigger. What's it connected to? Oh, okay. And what's that connected to? And how is that like your values? Aren't each of the things that you hold true, like your family and work and your spirituality and your recreational pursuits, aren't they all connected to something bigger? Like what is that bigger thing that they're connected to? And as you kind of walked through this, it became like something that I knew I wanted to keep as a framework for an intervention, and I would do the same intervention somewhat differently from time to time throughout the next 20 years, because it is the case that although you may value climbing and adventure, you may have other things like your children and your relationship with Jen and whatever else is going on in your life today, and yet you still see yourself as a climber. It's still there as part of who you are. And I'm pretty certain that under the right contextual variables, you'll start climbing again. You could start climbing again. It's not a
Yeah, yeah, I would it would probably be the same as when we see each other after a while and we just keep the conversation, continue the conversation where we left it off.
Yeah,
It would feel the
yeah.
same. Yeah, there's a sense of yeah, of continuity, of integration of something important. It's yeah, I really like to think of it this way. Perhaps that's age helps you also realize that because you have experienced some losses, disappointments, and coming back to realize that nothing really disappears completely. For me, that's the idea with the function is that you develop a function. It's another way of saying you integrate what's transcendent about the experience or the person or place. I have been in France for almost 6 years now because of COVID and stuff and the time, not enough money to go there and all, and I miss it. But there's a point at which I was like, frustrated not to be able to go there and missing it, and so, starting also to wonder with age if there are certain places that I will see again. I mean, you could say, oh, you're not that old. Yeah, but it doesn't really matter. At some point, you start to realize that there are some places you won't have the time to see again, or at least no more than one time if you're lucky. So I'm starting to relate to those places as they might just be memories now. I might never actually experience it again. But what's interesting is that you also experience that they don't really go anywhere. You can see them, you can feel them, you can remember them. That you extracted the function. That's how I like to think about it. It's like you go through multiple example training, and what remains is the function. The same thing is that progressive is something is there and is not gonna go anywhere. It's part of your history. Well, I like that. So yeah, I'm a climber in that sense. Is that in that the memories I have and what I've learned is in my repertoire. It's not
Mhm.
going anywhere. I might not climb very well if I start tomorrow. Although one of the cool things about this kind of activities is that, like riding a bike, you don't forget so much of it because it's so much based on sensations and direct feeling that, in a way, you don't forget it that much. But beyond that, it's yeah, it's a form of secure attachment in a way. It can go anywhere, but you are not worried about disconnecting from it. There's a form of permanence there.
So uh, I ran away because I want to grab a book and share it with you,
Uh-huh.
and I will in just a second. But now I have to share a different book with you, and I'm gonna show it on the screen because
Yeah. Can you share your
uh,
screen, or do you need me to? You can
I
request and I
see.
allow the sharing
Yes, you have
as
to
the host.
send
Yes,
a
go ahead.
request. So, for anybody who is watching this, you can take a look at it. If you're not watching this, the name of the book is How to Solve a Problem, and it's written by Ashima Shirashi. And she grew up in New York City. And in New York City, there is a boulder, which is a rock, which is about 15, 20 feet high at its apex on the south end of Central Park.
Hmm.
And Ashima was maybe 7 or 8 years old when she first came across Rat Rock. It's called Rat Rock because when climbers first discovered this boulder, it was also used by junkies and
Hmm.
frequented by rats because
Hmm.
junkies would eat their food and things like
Hmm.
this. It was a pretty
Right,
gross
right.
and unstable environment initially until climbers kind of like began being there 24 hours a day. But there was an older Japanese dude we used to call I don't remember what did we call him? Zen Master Shiru, I think. He had a glass eye. He was a brilliant, really good climber, and he used to live there and climbed there a lot. And he took Ashima under his wing, and Ashima became a world-class rock climber. But inside of this book on how to solve a problem, uh, she writes about her relationship with beauty, but also her relationship with problem solving. And so, in a way, climbers kind of dance back and forth between exploring and creating and discovering, but also systematically, carefully thinking through things like a chess player thinks through
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
The pants that she wears, by the way, her mother makes all of her pants. But I thought I would share this with you.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's
the
nice. I'd
other
love to check
book
it
that I
out.
wanted to share is this.
Wait, yeah, flip it. Okay. Uh, yeah.
Ed Wilson was the preeminent evolutionary scientist.
Can you say the title out loud for those who will just listen?
Yes, the title is E.O. Wilson and B.F. Skinner,
Okay.
a dialogue between sociobiology and radical behaviorism.
Hmm.
And this dude, Paul Nour, got Ed Wilson and B.F. Skinner together before either one of them died. Before Skinner died, a
Hmm.
couple before Skinner died, and Wilson lived a couple years longer. Wilson in the 1970s, in 1976, he published a book, Sociobiology. He was the world's preeminent evolutionary scientist, and he had written extensively on kin theory, the notion that natural selection primarily functions on the basis of bloodline.
Hmm.
Uh, and he had read, Wilson had read Skinner. And so he understood behavioral selection and cultural selection. And E.O. Wilson basically said, in the end, phylogeny trumps ontogeny. And
Hmm.
now, so he wrote this book in 76 called Sociobiology, and 35 chapters, nobody has any problems with. But the 36th chapter, where he addresses issues of social stratification and sexism and racism, he says ultimately kin selection, phylogeny trumps ontogeny. And this raised the ire of Richard Lewontin and Stephen Jay Gould and dozens of other left-leaning
Hmm.
scientists who accused him of being racist and
Sure,
sexist, which was
sure.
the opposite of the truth. He was not either of those things. He was deeply, deeply committed to people's issues, but he was somewhat pessimistic. The
Mm.
fact that he was pessimistic didn't stop him from being a scientist. He continued, he simply said what his data were showing him. And then his students started showing him more and more and more data that was disconfirming of his hypothesis.
Mm.
Mind you, in 1978, a young graduate student sent him some data, and E.O. Wilson looked at this data and said, this is good. And you need to write this up for PNAS, which was like the world's most important evolutionary science journal. And so the dude writes it up. They send it to PNAS and it's published as is in PNAS. Well, so this doctoral student, like he submits the paper that he publishes in PNAS as his dissertation, and nobody has anything
Mm,
bad to say about it. It
mm,
is the world's smallest, shortest doctoral dissertation, 12 pages.
mm.
That young scientist, not related to Ed Wilson, David Sloan Wilson,
Uh,
who 30 years later, Tony Wilson reads and says, I got to connect you with my buddy Steve Hayes. And Steve
yeah.
is at that point like just around the time that you and I were hanging out
Yeah, it was
together,
around 2010, the
really
time when
interested
they
in
really got
connecting the
connected. Yeah.
dots between evolutionary science and behaviorism.
Hmm.
And Brandon Sanford joins the lab, and Brandon had a biology background, and then he
Hmm.
starts working with David Sloan Wilson, and and here's what happened. David's dissertation showed that ants can engage in altruistic behavior
Yeah.
across species, not necessarily not only within species, but across species.
Mm.
And so E.O. Wilson thought that was fantastic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And enough to like help him get his career started. But they argued for the next 30 years, like Ed Wilson saying what you discovered is an anomaly, and David saying, no, what I discovered is the way that we change the world. And it wasn't until 2008. And I mean, this is amazing. I'm sitting in Linda Hayes's philosophy class
Hmm.
at UNR,
Hmm.
and I'm opening up my email and I'm seeing the newspaper, and I'm seeing because I was like that kind of grad student who reads the newspaper while I'm in class. I don't know, but I'm like sitting there and I'm like, holy shit. Ed Wilson has just admitted his own students gave him enough data that he is changing his perspective.
Hmm. Hmm.
He is now saying, I was wrong. There's sufficient reason to suspect that altruism and cooperation across species happens far more than I had ever imagined possible.
Yeah.
Now, there's something really interesting in the fact that I was in Linda Hayes's class at that moment,
Yeah.
because not only did Ed Wilson change his perspective and acquire the wrath of hundreds of other scientists who called for his censure and having all of his credentials removed, and even trying to get him fired from his university position, mainly because they had just followed him and believed him, and they had built their careers around kin selection. But I'm sitting in Linda Hayes's class. Not many scientists do what Ed Wilson did. Not
No.
many
No.
scientists are willing to like
Not in
say,
the truly, yeah, not in a genuine way. Often
not in a
it's
genuine way. Yeah.
often it's to be the first to say it before other people will say it, right, and that's fair enough. Yeah, the contingencies of being a scientist is also to remain on top of your game, and it's a bit sad, but it's reality. If people publish papers to criticize your work, maybe it's better if you do it first, and it's also often socially rewarded. If you do it well, people will praise you, like we are doing now, for doing it. So there are contingencies that might contaminate the value of it to some extent. But I think we can recognize the difference in that. I think it's often through the lack of control over it. It's like, wow, yeah, I've discovered something. And you're not rushing into, but I have another idea. I know how to do. And in fact, that's what we meant to say from the beginning. But it's just no. There's a
Right.
true moment of,
Yeah.
wow, that's not what I thought. You're able to first take in that new reality and without rushing. I like that. I like people who are able to do that. It's very
Well, Linda
inspiring.
Hayes is the other person who I know who has done that.
Really?
Like,
Okay, that's interesting. I don't know her very well, so it's interesting to hear.
well, like, I mean, like, okay, so not during philosophy, but during verbal. I think I had taken verbal the semester before I took philosophy with
Hmm.
her.
Hmm.
In verbal, um, we asked Linda, we're reading Skinner's book, Verbal Behavior.
Yeah.
And I asked Linda, um, can we finish up verbal like a few weeks early so we can talk about RFT? And she's
Mm,
like, I don't really know very much about RFT. I was like, Linda, you were among the very first RFT researchers. What
mm,
about Lipkins, Hayes, and Hayes? And she was like, yes, that was then, this is now. She
mm,
said, that was my solipsistic period.
mm.
And so she was clearly saying that I said that then.
Yeah.
This is what
Yeah.
I'm saying
Yeah.
now.
That makes
And I,
sense.
I, I thought that was very, very, very challenging and also really powerful.
Yeah.
Now, there's a couple of other things that are really interesting. Is that the when during philosophy, she went down to Mexico and presented a paper saying descriptive contextualism is neither descriptive nor
Mm-hmm.
contextualism.
Mm-hmm.
And she said interbehaviorism is not descriptive and it's not contextualism. And she then, 10 years later, with Mitch Freiling, published that paper in
Just yes.
JCBS.
Yeah.
And I believe that I don't know where she's at now. I would be interested to talk with her, but I certainly have seen her at the last couple of ACBSs, and she likes the conference. And
Mm,
Emily Sanders listened to Dermot Barnholmes saying we called it relational frame theory, but really Cantor was more right than we ever gave him credit for. We should have called it relational field theory after J.R. Cantor's field theoretical
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And
Can see that.
Emily latched onto that and created a panel discussion with Dermot and with Linda, and she came and she's continued to come to CBS. And I don't know where she's at about RFT and CBS today, but I think that hers is that willingness, that absolutely uncommon willingness
Mm. Well,
to grow and change your perspective.
from her perspective and my understanding of interbehaviorism, the it's almost like the guide is coherence, right? There's a strong value of coherence, which is
There
not
is.
as true. I'm not saying it's not true, but it's not as true in the Steve's version of functional contextualism.
Yeah.
And it's a version, I should say just functional contextualism because he's kind of the father of, but I don't think it's a good way of approaching it because precisely I don't think that's what he would want. I think it's a community thing and we can at least have different perspectives on it. I do think that his version tends to lack that holistic coherence um, dimension that is more clearly stated in the interbehaviorism in Linda's
True.
position. And yeah, I do tend to find more. There's pros and cons in that, or at least pitfalls. People tend to be maybe a little more righteous and rigid when they value coherence uh, and sometimes also less open to other views because it threatens coherence, afraid of making a move because it might threaten their own coherence. But um, but at the same time, I've often found that I found that in my own supervisor, Steph Fresha, who was really a Skinnerian, but values coherence and integrity very, very high. And I've seen him admit that he was wrong or being open to other perspectives if it's in the service of coherence. That's really like
Mhm.
that. That's the thing that I know that it's more important than anything. I can be wrong, it doesn't matter. If I see that I like coherence, then yes, I can I'm not defensive anymore because it's more important. It's almost like having a relationship with God, it's like
Yeah.
coherence is more
I
important.
mean, it's certain or a very, very powerful drug.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I mean, I think that, I asked Linda, I believe in that philosophy class, I asked her if she was a realist or if Cantor was a realist. And she said, a not so naive realist.
Mm, mm,
And in a way, maybe the flip can be said about contextual behavior science or scientists, particularly Steve. If you were to say, are you a um, are you are you committed to no coherence? Yes, in a not so naive way.
mhm,
I mean, I
mhm.
would say that CBS is more committed to coherence than you would think. I
Mhm.
mean, it is certainly important that we latch on to the relational operant as being a foundational principle
Yeah,
from a CBS
yeah,
perspective, and
yeah,
that it is completely it leaves us rudderless in dealing with complex human behavior
yeah,
if we're able to like agree upon that one
yeah,
starting foundation. Like,
yeah,
and I have seen Steve quite literally pound his fist on the table saying, how much data do you
yeah,
need?
yeah. I
Like
saw that
40
too. Yeah,
years of
yeah,
data.
yeah,
Like, and I think that is a pitch for coherence, like that is
yeah,
what we need for a basic science to cohere and for us to be an inductive science.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
but I think it's a not so naive uh, coherence because
What do you
although I
mean
have,
by not so naive? Can
yeah,
you?
so although I haven't talked to Steve about it, my guess is that if you were to ask him, were it the case that bidirectional naming came up with those who were committed to a bidirectional naming account were to come up with as clear and coherent a framework that leads to testable hypotheses that lead to important human outcomes,
Mhm.
would you concede that that is just as valuable as RFT? My guess is that
Mm,
he would say yes. My guess is that he would say RFT is inherently flawed because it's developed by humans who have human interests at stake, and
mhm, mhm,
we are always in the process of learning and standing upon the shoulders of our forebears and
mhm.
discovering new things that we didn't know previously, and finding the things that we thought we understood we didn't understand as well as we thought that we did. And so I imagine he would say absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that is, I think, the not so naive coherence
Mhm.
uh, of our branch of
So in
this.
a way, what you're saying by not so naive is not so fused, I guess. Not
Yeah,
so
not so
right,
few.
right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just
Still.
using a not so naive thing because that's a Linda Hayesism, and I
Yeah, yeah,
think
no,
that
and I know that. I like that. I like to use different terms because they all have their different, little bit of a different function, a little flavor. So I
I
like
think
that.
other sciences
Yeah,
use that not so naive framing also. I think or the other way that you hear it is hard and soft.
yeah,
Like you hear hard determinism versus soft
sure.
determinism,
Yeah, yeah,
hard Sapir-Whorf hypothesis versus soft Sapir-Whorf
yeah,
hypothesis, things like that. Like, and I
yeah,
think that might be
yeah, yeah,
an even better way to talk about it.
yeah. Or you can think of it as pragmatic. It's grounded in data, in experience, but it's also conceptual, as we were saying earlier. It's also abstract, and
Yeah.
it's in the process of connecting the both end of the continuum. If you think of a continuum, that you can have an overall good system. And yeah, I think that's, well, personally, that's what I've liked about the functional contextualism and the community around it, is that I think we are constantly sort of checking ourselves and each other in the community to uh, remain grounded in data, but also not get too rigidly attached to data that we cannot have vision and ideas and concepts and dreams and
Well,
that's
and
probably
data
why Steve went
is
with the CBS and could not stand the behavior analysis community anymore. At some point, is that it was too rigid, too obsessively attached to data, and you could not say anything except if you had the data for to support it, and you cannot. I've seen a lot of behaviorists like that, to incredible researchers, and they're very precise, but they lack that Miles Davis, uh, you
So
know,
when I teach
style a bit to
acting,
adapt a bit and
I
to create.
and so many behavior analysts are still kind of committed to that precision.
Yeah, yeah,
And yes, I mean I remember that day when I opened up my email and here's like, Steve saying, I will keep a toothbrush at ABAI, but I'm
yeah,
not going
yeah, yeah,
anymore.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Here's why. And and then John Forsythe and Kelly and 25 other people said the same thing,
yeah,
and that
yeah.
was it. That was like you know, like ACBS had been around for a couple of years, Worldcon had been around for a couple of years, but now it was like, okay,
Yeah, I think it
this is
must have been in 2010, I think what you're
yeah,
saying.
something
Because
like that.
2009 is when I
Exactly.
met him
Exactly.
in Phoenix at that conference at ABA. That was my first conference, ABA, and also ACBS, because that's where I met a bunch of people from ACBS. 2010, I think it still went there. It was in Denver. But after that, that was over. And all the
Yeah, right.
students, all the people
Exactly.
from UNR, they stopped going. I was there too. And then after that, it was over.
So I said to Steve, like, uh, if you're not going to go to ABI, who's going to give the act workshops? And he
Hmm.
looked at me and said, you.
Hmm.
And so I gave my first act workshop at ABAI that next
Hmm.
year. And then like when I graduated, you mentioned, don't I do trainings with Jonathan? I was like, yeah, like
Yeah.
John, like I got a job working for Florida Institute of Technology,
Hmm.
and it was a hybrid master's degree program. And I was nested inside of a clinic, the clinic that Jonathan Tarbox was the research
Hmm.
director for.
Hmm. Hmm.
Of course, I chose like being in the office to share with him because then he and I could do research together. And so that was where we wrote that conceptual paper, the A ontology paper, and
Hmm.
we drafted a whole bunch of research together. And then I taught him about ACT, and I mean, he'd known about ACT and kind of been around it while he was at UNR, but he didn't think it was behavior analysis. And I got him to come out and do a workshop with me. By the second time we did a workshop together, he realized like but
Yeah.
what we both realized, and this goes to, I think, the balance of being meticulous as a climber and also being willing to try things that you can't prepare for, that you don't know,
Hmm.
is we are on the edge in behavior analysis of recognizing that we need to sacrifice precision for scope.
Hmm. Hmm.
So if you open up Cooper, Heron, and Heward, their book Applied Behavior Analysis, they somewhere not it's not a part of their central definition of science, but somewhere in a table they talk about precision and depth.
Hmm.
And Steve built upon that and articulated a definition of science as the generation of ever increasingly sophisticated statements about the world with precision, scope, and depth. Precision having to do with the capacity to narrow down on one single process to evoke an outcome in a given person at a given time. Depth having to do with the capacity of your statements to be helpful at different levels of analysis, of biology, cosmology, chemistry, and so on and so forth. And scope as being able to help a single person, but in a range of different problems, not just in this particular problem at this moment in time. Cooper, Heron, and Heward only talked about precision and depth. Steve articulated the additional part of scope, which is inversely proportional to precision. The more precise your constructs are, your statements about the world, the less scope they have. But the more scope your
Yeah.
constructs have, well, the more fuzzy they are and the less precise
Yeah.
they are.
Yeah. yeah,
applied behavior analysis has always erred on the side of precision. And that's why Steve and company said, that's it, I'm done with this
yeah,
like
yeah,
idiot group of people that can't like see beyond their data.
yeah,
And we are now, as I teach people today, we are now learning to balance
yeah.
out precision
Well, in
and
that
skill.
sense, I think it's in the tradition of Skinner.
Yeah, I agree.
When you
Totally.
write verbal behavior or well done too, he goes beyond the data because he wants more
Or
scope
science of
to the
human
data.
behavior. It's all interpretive, or
Yeah,
at least thirds of the book is
yeah.
interpretive
I
and
think
deeply committed to social justice. And yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's probably why, although that's not exactly the story, my story that led me to know about RFT, but that's probably one way or another. I would probably have ended up with the CBS community because what I liked about Skinner was yeah, I think the holistic dimension of it. In the end, it's about everything. I think I've always liked stuff that is about everything. And looking back, I think what I liked about psychology is that I could continue to talk about everything. So, since it's about behavior, in the end, it's the behavior of this and that, climbing, martial arts, or whatever. It's sort of the absolute discipline. I think it was that case was made. I didn't read the book, so I cannot really say it, but it was mentioned to me, The Fabric of Reality. Have you heard of this book? It's an interesting book. I read actually a couple of chapters, I think the beginning, but I think if I'm correct, and perhaps I'll be corrected, that's fine. But he puts, it's not a psychologist, but he puts psychology as a sort of a top of a sort of hierarchical system. Uh, I think it makes sense if you think that it's in the end we're always analyzing our own behavior,
Mhm.
right? No matter what you're studying, it's always your behavior studying something. So I'm doing geography. Well, I'm studying geology. I'm studying that, but in the end, I'm studying my behavior interacting with something. So it's you have to be holistic. You cannot be a psychologist without being interested in everything. You cannot be accused of going too large scale or too beyond the data because in the end, I'm still studying my behavior in relationship to that.
That, by the way, is a very, very interbehavioral
Yeah,
statement.
yeah,
That is about as
hmm
Kantorian a statement as
yeah,
you can
yeah,
make.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
always
I,
about the
I only
interbehavior with
recently
skill.
learned more about interbehaviorism. I read Linda and forgot his name again, book.
Filing, Mitch?
Yes, which I found really cool because it's a great primer as far as I can tell. I haven't read Cantor directly, didn't study it as you guys did at UNR with Linda. We read maybe one or two papers by Emilio Ribes Iniesta because he's he's a friend of my supervisor, and so we would read a couple of papers and would not really understand it, uh, or we didn't read, or we missed the points. I think that was the thing. We realized that probably we did not understand the whole thing. But long story short, it's only recently I read more about interbehaviorism, and kind of what Dermot said. I kind of feel like, yeah, that's actually um, more how we should think about RFT. And the interesting thing is, I don't think we necessarily have to go back and change what's been said about RFT. I think it's part of it is just the interpretation of the same words. And I look back at the book that we wrote, uh, even with the way my understanding has evolved since then. When I go back to it, I don't actually want to change much, but I understand things differently. That's quite interesting.
You know, I don't consider myself an interbehaviorist, but I do value interbehaviorism. And I didn't understand it the way Linda was teaching it. And reading, and you know, I took maybe 6 courses in all with Linda. I took more courses with Linda than anybody else,
Uh,
and so I read books that she didn't assign. So I read cultural psychology, I read The Logic of Science, I read The History of Science, I read all these books by Cantor. Like with Linda, I probably read 8 books by Cantor, and I read a couple
Hmm.
others I still didn't understand. Like what
They're
makes
difficult. They're difficult
interbehaviorism?
to, yeah.
And I started Googling and I found Cantor's dissertation,
Hmm.
and that really helped me.
Okay.
I also found an article by Paul Mountjoy, who had been one of Cantor's students, and that really helped me.
Hmm.
Paul Mountjoy pointed out that Cantor began his investigation of the field by studying Maxwell and Faraday.
Hmm.
Maxwell and Faraday were physicists who were interested in magnetism and
Hmm.
electricity. They were causal theorists. They were interested in a mechanistic cause and effect approach to understanding magnets and electricity.
Hmm.
They were finding that magnets and electricity don't behave as expected when under investigation. And yet that's where Cantor began, with this sense of cause and effect is important.
Yeah.
But Maxwell and Faraday, like, in the early part of the 20th century, were discovering that in a field, things reverse their polarities. And that became a fascination that led to physics expanding and expanding and expanding its horizons beyond cause and effect.
Okay.
Heisenberg came out
Yeah.
with the indeterminacy principle. Einstein came
Hmm.
out with quantum mechanics,
Hmm.
and post-Einsteinian physics took towards string theory and superstring theory and landscape theory and super landscape theory, the theory of everything, and so on and
Yeah.
so forth, which have expanded this notion of the field. And in the social sciences, there is Kurt Lewin, who articulated a social psychology field theoretical perspective along the same, during the same years that Cantor was advancing the
Yeah.
field theoretical
Yeah. Yeah.
perspective. So it's not like Cantor was in a vacuum doing this.
No, I think
Other
that's what
scientists were
happens.
doing
We
it.
we realize it perhaps better now because of the internet and the communication that
Yeah.
when you're on an idea and you think that it's unique and then you look around and you're like, wait, other people are doing the same thing. Is it because we're all influenced by the same thing? Is it just part of a system evolving? It is quite fascinating, humbling too, but also reassuring in a way. Like there was a time when like a lot of, especially when you're younger in your career. Um, you think that RFT is so special, that people need to know about RFT and that they could change game changer and everything. And
Yes,
then
that
there's
was you. I
also,
remember you.
yeah, but then there's a realization that, it's probably not the only one who are assigned to think that way, anyways. Uh, if you go beyond the specific words and concepts, it's moving in that direction because I mean you could make the case that it's because it's unavoidable. If you try to make things work, you're gonna have to be holistic. You have to be relational. You're gonna have to be perhaps interbehaviorist in some ways, integrated and thinking in terms of field until it's a different model, perhaps. But I find that very reassuring. It's like in a systemic spirits, you don't have to intervene on everything. You don't have to necessarily scream that truth. You can also watch what's happening around you sometimes and appreciate that.
I'm still committed to, I'm more committed to pragmatism
Hmm.
than Cantor behaviorism is. And so if you look at Cantor's model, it's got everything. And Skinner pared things down to what was most important, antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. And I asked Steve about this because had been arguing with Joe Lang, who is a student of Israel Gold Diamond, and Joe kept on pushing uh, the nonlinear contingency analysis
Yeah.
model that Diamond had developed on me. And so I asked Steve about it. And he was like, "Yeah, it's probably right. I mean, it's got everything, but who can use it? It's like
So where's
two.
Steve's point, right? Yeah.
Well, that
He
is,
wants to do
yes,
things with
and
it. He doesn't want to
right,
just like
exactly.
theorize and
But that's
yeah,
this is the rift between the descriptive and the functional,
yeah,
and
yeah.
from Steve's perspective and my perspective, like I was drawn to applied behavior analysis in a way that I was never drawn to other branches of psychology,
Then
and
do
I
something with
was
it.
in my 40s before I discovered behavior analysis, and I'm ready to go back to grad school for this
Yeah,
because this is
yeah,
pragmatic. It makes sense. I can do something with this,
yeah,
and I value and he said to me, like, it's just like Cantor's model. It's probably right. It's got everything, but who can use it? And so I mentioned his dissertation, Cantor's dissertation, because Cantor, at the end of his dissertation, after bosh bashing every single psychologist from after Aristotle who he liked,
hmm,
after Aristotle, he didn't like anybody, and he bashed everybody up until the 20th century. And the one person he said he liked was John Dewey.
yeah,
And of course, John Dewey is like the
yeah,
pragmatist found father of behaviorism. So
yeah,
really, like, I was like, man, like there's
yeah,
something about Cantor that I really like, but also not. But coming to Skinner, it's not just science of human behavior. Upon further reflection, behaviorism and society, these were books that he wrote, which were deeply interpretive and
yeah,
expanded beyond the data. And he wanted us to develop the data to stay with this. So he
yeah.
really wanted to see data on some of the things that he was writing about. But uh, I value the interpretive, as I think you do. I
Yeah.
value going beyond the data and dreaming
That's,
and
I think I'm comfortable in that
managing
space. I
stuff.
think part of it
Yeah,
is just recognizing what you are good at.
yeah,
I I'm comfortable with I would not say I'm more an artist than a scientist because I would have been an artist in that case, I think. My parents were artists, so it would have been easy to go that direction. Uh,
with a
but
black
I,
beret and like cigarette.
yeah, yeah, why not? Well, apparently I was more attracted to American culture because I moved here. So, I grew up watching American movies and fascinated by the American culture. Uh, so I guess by arts too, but I need that. It goes back to what we were saying earlier, and again through this discussion. It's the balance between precision, being very systematic, and actually my parents were classical musicians, so they it requires a lot of preparation,
Yeah,
rehearsing. It's not jazz. They like jazz, but they were not
yes.
jazz
Yeah,
musicians.
yeah.
And at the same time, it's art. So you need to interpret, you need to bring emotion. To me, that's a really interesting balance of both being, uh, yeah, in the interpretation, in the subjectivity, in the emotion, and the precision, the hard work. Um, I don't think I could have lasted, and I didn't, I guess, very long in the pure science and research because it is too. Uh, I experience it as too limiting. I know it's not inherently like that. I think you can be incredibly creative and remain an experimental psychologist, and of course. But for me, when I look at Steve's career and the way he approaches his work, I often see more of an engineer kind of creativity. I want to be able to do something with it. Whereas I'm more comfortable, especially with time, with being contemplative, and I do think it's doing something. That's why I've realized more and more over time in my work with clients. Is that observing, noticing, describing, if we want, it is doing something. I think it's misinterpretation if you say, well, Cantor has a model, but what can we do with it? I think it's missing the point, is that it's it provides a vision, and then you can watch what you do when you have that vision. That's the doing. But when you're like, well, what can I do with it? I think you may also see it as compromising the philosophy itself. Um,
I
At least
don't
that's
think
where
that
I'm
a
at this
basic
point.
scientist is beholden to figuring out what to do with what they discover, nor do I think a philosopher is beholden to developing basic science or applied science on the basis of what they dream about. And I think that it's a mistake to hold the one to the craft of the other.
Yeah.
I respect the craft of each. And I have an ongoing commitment to science. I had an opportunity to jump out of this and go into pure practice, and I decided not to because applied behavior analysis has had kind of like a 10-year flirtation with ACT,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
my commitment is to make sure that ACT remains a solid part of the
Yeah.
toolkit that applied behavior analysts use, and
Yeah.
that requires some more experiments being published. And I'm one of maybe 10, 20 people who
Yeah.
can pull off some of the experiments that need to be conducted, and then I'll be, I don't know when that doneness point is, but at some point I'll be ready to
Yeah.
say, okay, this is somebody else's responsibility from this point forward. And hopefully some of my students will carry that torch, and Jonathan's students and others will carry that torch forward.
You did a really nice job, I think, with your book and Act and Behavior Analysis. The way you walk the reader through the Exaflex with the behavior analytic interpretation. It's one of those books, you can say, I wish I had that book when I got into ACT because I could also have just, you know, put the book aside because it was not true behavior analysis. There was some faith, some intrigue, some attraction that's not scientific or rational that got me to stick with it. Uh, but unfortunately, I found something there valuable. But I think if I had read your book at that time, I would have been more convinced that there was a true connection there. And it's nice reflecting on when we met, when I moved to Reno in 2010, having these discussions. And I don't know what you thought at that time, but I certainly didn't think I would write a book on RFT and clinical practice. Who spent years working on that. I mean, it's not that it was totally impossible, but it was not a plan. It was more like something that came as I was passionate about the topic. What about you? Did you have that kind of vision for your career back then when we met 2010? Did you know where you were going to go? Did you know what you wanted to do with your career?
When I discovered behavior analysis in 2003, 2002, and I started reading everything I could get,
Yeah.
um, and I was using what I could get out of this book that I bought, Behavior Analysis for Lasting Change, and making a difference in people's lives. I knew I wanted to go to grad school. Well, I didn't know I wanted to go to grad school. I knew I wanted to use behavior analysis.
Okay.
They invited me to direct behavioral services in the company that I worked at, and I just said, absolutely not. You got to be kidding me. I read a book. Get
Uh,
somebody who knows what they're doing, and I'll work for them. And they flew up Jeff Kupfer from Florida, and Jeff had been a student of Ed Malagodi at University of Florida, and Ed was a cultural behavior analyst and like really started cultural behavior science in behavior analysis. And Ed was a rat runner, and so everybody was running rats and listening to Frank Zappa. Like you had to be a Frank Zappa fan to be in Ed's lab, and Jeff kind of grew up in that world and had started an applied business shortly after graduating in the early 70s when that was like brand new. And they brought him up to be my boss and to direct behavioral services. And Jeff turned me on to the beauty of behavior analysis and Skinner's work, and gave me Skinner books to read, and gave me Murray Sidman books to read, and so I started reading everything I could get, uh, and then I came across and Jeff turned me on to um, uh, molar behaviorism. He turned me on to Billy Baum's stuff,
mhm,
and
mhm.
Baum should have been a friend of RFT, because
Yeah.
RFT has a similar flavor to it,
Hmm.
and um, uh, and as I started reading, I came across Steve's work, and having been a climbing guide and having worked with Outward Bound and doing outdoor adventure therapy, Steve's work just latched and I don't know if I ever told you, but I wrote to Steve and said, I want to come and study with you. He didn't write back. But I wrote to Jim Carr and Alice Dickinson at Western Michigan University, and they said, come to Western, take our core undergraduate curriculum, take a couple grad school classes,
Mm,
and be a research assistant in our laboratories. And then you'll be attractive. Then
mm,
because it had been 20 years since I finished my undergraduate, and I didn't do
yeah,
any psychology as an undergrad.
yeah,
And so then I wrote to UNR and got in and went and worked with Larry Williams and worked with Steve and I knew from the very beginning what I wanted to do was to bring ACT into applied behavior analysis.
okay,
So it has in and from the very beginning I recognized, hi, come on in. From the very beginning I recognized that this was going to be an uphill battle, that
yeah,
behavior analysts were a group of very deeply conservative
yeah,
humans who
yeah,
were
yeah,
politically very progressive,
yeah,
but in terms of their scientific perspective, very careful. And I
yeah,
recognized very early on that their carefulness had to do with protecting their right to practice. And then I was gonna, if I wanted to bring ACT into behavior analysis, I was gonna have to do it in a way that would be protective of our right to practice. I would have
yeah,
to do it in a way that would not would not push too hard on the boundary between psychotherapy and
yeah.
um, whatever it is that applied behavior analysts do. And so, yes, I knew from the very beginning that's what
I
I would
see.
do. And I've known that that's also why I'm not done with the research bit in my
I
career, that
see.
there's still more
I see.
research to do to make sure that it isn't just a passing fad.
I
And
see.
it could be if I were to drop out now, and if Jonathan were to drop out now, I think, 5 years from now, there won't be any ACT in ABA. So I think we have more work to do to make sure it
Yeah,
stays.
which show, of course, could always happen, but the contribution that you've made, as we were saying earlier about the topic, it's not lost. You know, it's no matter what you've accomplished at this point, I think is a nice reflection of that vision that you had already back then. It's very, very cool. Very cool.
Well, you are too kind. Listen, Matt, I
Yeah,
have
I
to
know you're
go.
on it. It's a good, I think
Yeah.
it's a good place to, I mean, I almost want to say to pause because I think there is more to
Let's
say
do it again.
and
Let's have
it would
another
be really
episode.
great. We still haven't climbed together, but this discussion really felt like a really functionally similar and I really enjoyed it a lot. So thank you, Tom.
Come on in.
And I love this transition. You gotta keep. I'm gonna leave you with your. Is that a student? You're working with a
Student
student?
just walked in, and one of my colleagues is here, so
Okay,
I'll have
that's
to go.
wonderful. All right, I'll let you with that. And thank you very much, Tom. I can't wait to
Bye,
see you
Dr.
again
Valak.
later. All
It's
right.
always a pleasure. I love you very much. See you soon. Bye
All
bye.
right. Bye bye.